Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov. How are you?
I'm well, thank God. How about yourself?
Nice day outside.
That it was.
Shavua Tov.
Shavua Tov.
Seems to be working, right?
Yep.
Okay, great. I'm outside.
Yeah, that's nice. I mean, it's so gorgeous today.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Let me just plug in my computer. Hopefully I won't get electrocuted.
That would be good.
If I did, you know what happens.
Gosh.
Where are you?
I'm in northwest corner of Connecticut, where my mother-in-law has a house that we often go to, at least pre-COVID. But now as well. Okay, so if it's not so clear or if the internet bugs out, let me know. But it looks good. 1 second. There's bugs. Okay. So we should get started, right? It's time. Perfect. So we're on Daf Tzadi today, as we all know. I'm going to just read the Mishnah again. This is incredibly complicated Mishnah. Thankfully, we've had like 90 days of preparation, so we should be doing just fine. But the Mishnah starts off with the words, Kol Gagot Ha'ir, right? All the roofs in a city, which a city is probably an exaggeration here, but let's just say in a cluster, are Reshut Achat. They're one area, as long as there's one Gag that's not higher than the rest. That's Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim said, Kol Echad Ve'echad Reshut B'fnei Atzmo. Each one is its own Reshut. And we said yesterday, I'm sure David you did it yesterday, right? Yes. So yesterday we discussed what does that mean, Reshut B'fnei Atzmo. So it was Machloked Rav and Shmuel. Rav said that Reshut B'fnei Atzmo means that each roof, again, let's say the case is you have 4 houses and they have roofs that are next to each other. They're not higher or lower. They're probably separate, meaning there's like a few inches between each one, but maybe even if they weren't, it wouldn't matter. That's a detail that gets very complicated. But even if they're separate, they're very close to each other. And so you can carry, it says, well, the Chachamim say each one's Reshut Latzmo. So Rav says that means that I'm reviewing the Mishnah for those who are just joining. Rav says Reshut Latzmo means that that you can only carry 4 amot, meaning that they're considered to be totally inaccessible. It's like a Reshut Rabim. And the reason being is that because there are no walls on the roof is open to all the other roofs next to it. It's like any mechitza that's nifratz b'melo'o, that's open in its majority portion. It doesn't count as any mechitza. And so basically you're wide open to all the area around you, and you can't carry more than 4 amot. And so what's the chiddush of Reshut Latzmo? The chiddush is that you can't also carry from one roof to another roof, even if it's less than 4 amot, right? Because it's a different person's Reshut. Shmuel said, I disagree. I think every person has their own roof as their own space, and you can walk on your entire roof and carry on your entire roof, even if it's 1,000 feet big, right? Large. You just can't carry it to someone else's roof. And we said in the Gemara yesterday that the machloka between them was whether you imagine that the walls of the house go up, or good achit, and go up and make imaginary walls on your roof. According to Shmuel, they go up and they make walls, and according to Rav, they don't. And therefore, according to Shmuel, you can carry, and according to Rav, you cannot. And I'm repeating that just because we're going to need it for today's daf. So we are the top line of Daf Tzadi, I believe. Boi Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama asked the following question. Rashi understands, as does Tosfos, that, or of course everyone, I think, that this is according to Rav, right? So according to Rav, who says that if you have your own roof, you can only carry 4 amot on that roof because you don't view the edges of the roof as being imaginary mechitzot. So it's like a public space, so to speak. You can only carry 4 amot. What if you have shtei amot begag? You want to carry 2 amot on the gag, ushtei amot be'amud. Right next to your gag, in your courtyard, you have a pillar, right? And on the top of this pillar, you want to jump from one place to the other, or you want to carry a piece of bread or a ball or whatever. Can you do 4 amot from the roof onto the pillar? So that was his question, Mahu. Now, Amar Rabba said, Rabba, what kind of question is that, Rami Bar Chama? My kami boile. What's your question? The roof, if you recall, is considered to be a carmelit, right? It's considered to be a wide open space that is open on all sides. So it's a karmelit according to Rav, because it has no mechitzot, right? According to the pillar, if we're talking about a pillar, which is how Rashi understands it, a pillar that is 10 tfachim tall and 4 tfachim wide, that's our classic case of Reshut HaYachid. And so your question really is, can you carry from a roof, which is a karmelit, to a pillar that's a Reshut HaYachid, if it's less than 4 amot? But everybody knows the answer to that, right? That's said Rabbah, that's not a question. My kami boile, karmelit Reshut HaYachid, kami boile, Rashi's bitmiya. Is he asking, can you carry from a karmelit, which is, again, the karmelit's an in-between. It's not a Reshut Rabim, but it's a wide open area without borders, and therefore it's treated like a Reshut Rabim, midrabanan. Of course you can't carry from there to Reshut HaYachid. So what kind of question is that? Says the Gemara, you're right. Rami bar Chama agav churfe lo ayimba. Sometimes you have a question, you want to understand the situation, you don't think it through before raising your hand and asking the question. Happens a lot, right? So he didn't really think it through before he asked the question. What he really meant to ask, what he was thinking, what his mind was doing ahead of his mouth, was elahachi kami boile. This is what his question was. Let's say you have shtei amot bigag, you want to move an object 2 amot on the roof, according to Rav, and shtei amot ba'aksadra. Remember, an aksadra is a, what's the word, pergola we use, I think? But it's an area that's open on all 4 sides, as Rashi puts it. You have just one strip of wood or whatever you make it out of, or metal, on each 4 corners, right? And then a roof, right? And that's not considered Reshut HaYachid, because we're talking about walking on the top of that thing. And so the top of that thing is a roof, just like the top of your roof. So basically the question then is going from one karmelit to another karmelit. And that was his question. Not to an amud, which is a Reshut HaYachid, but from a karmelit to another karmelit. His question was, if you have shtei amot begag, or shtei amot ba'aksadra, mahu. Now, remember that Rav said, Rav is going according to the Chachamim. And the Chachamim very clearly said, everyone's Reshut la'atzmo, remember. Meaning, if I have a roof and you have a roof next to me, I can't carry from my can't carry from my roof to your roof, even, just to be clear, if it's less than 4 amot. Because, according to the Chachamim, the fact that people live underneath that means that they're different diurin, right? So what's the question about carrying from a roof to a karmelit? From a roof to a, whatever it's called, a aksadra. So says the Gemara, the question is, kivan de lo hai chazi ladira, lo hai chazi ladira, since the roof is not something that many people live on top of, meaning there's only one person living there, and the aksadra is not something you live in, right? Aksadra is an outdoor thing. There's no walls, so it's not chazi ladira. You might therefore think that it's considered to be the same category, and you can carry from one to the other. Given the lo hai chazi ladira chada reshutahi odilma, or do you say that since the Chachamim aser kivan de migag the gag asir, migag l'aksadra nami asir, that the same way, even though you're within 4 amot, you can't carry from one roof to another roof, you also can't carry from one roof to an aksadra. Do we say that's the same category, even though you can't live in an aksadra? So they didn't answer the question. Now, by Rav Bibi bar Abaya asked the following question. He said, what if it's shtei amot begag or shtei amot bechorva? What if you have a chorva? Everyone remembers a chorva is a house that is run down, that is abandoned and uninhabitable, right? Because the front door is knocked down. So the chorva is a house, but it's not, doesn't have a wall. Can you carry from a roof onto the chorva? So they said to him right away, what kind of question is that, right? Again, Rashi understands it means, well, I take it back. Rashi doesn't understand this, but Tosfos understands that it means the roof of the chorva, right? You're going from the roof of one to the roof of the other. I'm going to skip Rashi because it's a little complicated. But let's say shtei amot begag, shtei amot bechorva, mahu. So Amar Rav Kahana, what kind of question is that, Rav Bibi bar Abaya? Lav hayna de Rami bar Chama. Rami bar Chama already asked the same question, right? Do you say from a roof to an aksadra? What's the difference between a roof to aksadra and a roof to a chorva? Amar Rav Bibi bar Abaya, said Rav Bibi bar Abaya to Rav Kahana, you think that I don't know that? You think I'm not sa'i? You think I'm just coming after another one and repeating and asking the same question? I know what he said. I am asking about a different case. I'm pointing out that an aksadra, which is again an open pergola, if that's the word, lo chazoi ladira. No one lives there. There's no walls, right? You can't live. Doesn't protect you from the rain or the wind or anything. Chorva chazoi ladira. A churva is a house. It's a fixer-upper, as they say, right? It's a house. You just need to do some work to it. So potentially, either you can live in it as it is, because it gives you some protection, or you can rapidly turn it into a functional house. And therefore, my question says, so he said back to him, so what? So what's your question? If it's chazoy ladira? And he said, what I was asking was the following. Im tim salomar ka'amar. I was saying, if you answer the first question of Rav Bibi Bar Abaya, then I have this question. Meaning, Im tim salomar, if the answer to Rav Bibi Bar Abaya's question about a roof and an aksadra is that aksadra lo chazay ladira, but chorva chazay ladira, aksadra lo chazay ladira, then an aksadra is not something you can live in, and therefore it's permitted to carry from a roof onto an aksadra. My question is, what about a chorva? A chorva, which is chazay ladira, do you say you cannot carry onto it? Or dilma hashtamia let badir, and it's not currently inhabited. And if it's not currently inhabited, maybe it's just like the roof. And that answer to that question is teiko. We don't know the answer. And so this adds an element, which we discussed yesterday, and we'll discuss a lot more going forward, as to the fact that there are many, many different details that separate these areas, these, I don't know what the right word is, but these spaces, maybe, right? That you could have a space that is separated because there's different ownership, meaning a gag that's owned by many people, right? That's on top of many houses. So there's many people who can go there. But you also have spaces that are differentiated between how you use them. And as we said earlier, if many people, and this is a big, big discussion that we're going to continue having right now, but let's say, again, according to Shmuel, for example, right? So Shmuel said, the Mishnah said, according to the Chachamim, the middle opinion, that if you have 4 houses and each one has a roof on top of it, and those roofs are next to each other, you cannot carry on that whole roof space. Why can't you carry in the roof space? So say the Chachamim, because each roof is the space of the house below it, right? Shmuel understood that to mean that you take the space of the house, you take the walls of the house, you have them go up, to be walls around the roof. So basically, it's like you have 4 separate roofs that belong to 4 separate people. Now, there are no walls, right? So in theory, they're not separated, but you view it that way halachically. And therefore, you can't carry from one section to another section the same way you can't carry from one house to another house, right? Now, Reb Meir in our Mishnah disagreed with that. Remember, Reb Meir was a Tanakama. He said all the roofs are reshut achat lehem, meaning you can carry from one to the other. 4 different people live in them, right? So how do you explain that? So as we're going to say later today, and I think you probably said yesterday, Reb Meir obviously says that the whole concept of living somewhere only applies to your house, right? If a roof is not where you live, it's not you might go up there, you might hang out there, but you put a barbecue there even, but it's not where you live. And so all the rules of living don't apply to a roof, even though ownership does apply to a roof, right?
Well, I thought you said right in the beginning, like our first thing, that Reshut HaYachid does not mean ownership.
It doesn't, right? So exactly correct.
No,
So Reshut HaYachid does not mean ownership, but necessarily, right? But it could, right? But so correct. So it still is a Reshut HaYachid as long as it has mechitzot, as long as it has boundaries.
right.
And the question here could be going from one, who says you can't carry from one Reshut HaYachid to another Reshut HaYachid, right? So according to this, you can. It's only a house to another house you can't carry from because there's some rule about people living there. And we're gonna explore this a lot today and further. The next thing, and the reason I give that introduction is the next thing gets very complicated. The Mishnah then said that Gagin Hashavim, right? So remember, if you have many roofs, sorry, what's the question? Say.
Korva is just, it's not in any of the existing categories. It's not a Carmelite, it's not a Reshut HaYachid, it's not a Reshut HaRabim, it's some other weird category.
So I would say that in essence, though this is not technically true, everything has to be in one of 3 categories, right?
Okay.
Well, 4 categories. Everything has to be either Reshut HaYachid, Reshut HaRabim, Carmelite, or what's called Makom Patur, right? Now, Makom Patur is really a Shabbos discussion. It's really not an Eruvin.
Right.
But almost everything in the middle is considered to be Carmelite, where it has features of Reshut HaYachid, features of Reshut HaRabim. Midoraita, you can carry whatever you want there, but Midrabanan, they prohibited it like the other ones. So a churva would probably be Reshut HaYachid, though, in this case, because you have to imagine that the walls go up, according to Shmuel at least.
Okay.
But either way. Continues the Gemara. Gagina shavin, right? We're halfway down to Tzadi. If you have many roofs that are equal, right? Remember, Rabbi Meir said that if one roof is higher than the other, you have a different problem. But let's say they're all equal. So you have 4 owners. They all have a roof that is equal among them. Says Rabbi Meir, you can carry in that whole roof, right? Or that's not what Rabbi Meir says. Rabbi Meir said, Reshut achat lehem. They're all one Reshut, right? Or let's just say Gag Yichidi the Rabbanan. Rabbanan said that if many owners have it, each roof belongs to its owner. But let's say I live in a house and my roof is huge and it's on top of my house, right? But there's no walls around it. So what would you assume, James, that you can carry on that whole roof, right? You would assume that. But says the Gemara, you're wrong. Rav Amar mutar l'taltal b'kula. Rav says, no, you're right. Sorry. Rav does agree with you. Rav said, and that's how we paskin, that you can carry in the whole roof. But Shmuel says, you can only carry 4 amot on that roof. Even though it's your roof and you own it, you can only carry 4 amot. Or even according to Rabbi Meir, that you don't care about ownership and that we all share this roof and it's not considered to be public, right, or whatever, it's not a problem. You can only carry 4 amot. Well, says the Gemara, that doesn't make any sense. First of all, I gave the introduction today of what we said yesterday, right? So Rav Amar mutar tatal bekulo kasha derav derav. If you recall, I quoted this, but yesterday David taught that if you have, according to the Chachamim, let's say you have 4 houses and 4 roofs on top of the houses, Reshut, each one is its own Reshut, right? The Chachamim said, the words were, Kol echad ve'echad Reshut b'fnei atzmo. Said Rav yesterday, that meant that you cannot carry on your own roof. You can only walk 4 amot. So how could he be saying today that if you have your own roof, you can carry on the whole roof? It's a stira of Rav, under Rav. Says, well, that's because we're talking about different cases. When you have 4 houses together and 4 roofs together, you don't see the edge of each house. They're right next to each other. And therefore, Rav said you can't say good achit. You can't make the walls of the house go up and be imaginary mechitzot. Hatam lo minkra mechitzata. When you have 4 roofs together, you can't see the mechitza of each one individually. But hacha, because it's one house, according to the Chachamim, or according to Rabbi Meir, where you view it all as one house, you can imagine that the walls of the house go straight up to the sky, and they're imaginary kosher mechitzot, and therefore you can carry in the whole thing. Okay, what about Shmuel? Shmuel says, remember, we said yesterday that Shmuel said, according to the Chachamim, you can carry on your whole roof. How can you carry on your whole roof? But if it's only one roof, you can only carry 4 amot. Makes no sense. Kasha de Shmuel ad Shmuel. Says the Gemara, well, the reason is Shmuel holds you can carry on your whole roof because you imagine that the walls of the house go up to the sky. And so your roof is encircled, right? But here we're talking about a mega roof. Hatam lo havi yoter mi beit satayim. It wasn't bigger than 2,000 amot, the beit satayim. Hacha havi yoter mi beit satayim. We're talking about here where you have a roof that's more than 2,000 amot. It's beit satayim. And therefore what? Right? So remember that when we said earlier that when you have a space that's not a house and not a Reshut,
the size of the Mishkan, isn't it 5,000?
it's 50 by 50. It's like 2,500, right?
It's not 50 by 100.
Oh, wait, maybe it is. A sa'ah.
About 50 saws, I think, 50 by 50.
Correct.
Anyway, it doesn't really matter, but I just wanted
You're
to.
right. A sa'ah is 50 by 50. Beit times, you're correct. 50 by 100. So 5,000 square amot. So here, you're right, 2 sa'ahs. So here you have, now, remember, we talked earlier, let's say you have a big open field, right? So we said earlier, if it's walls around it, it's considered to be private property. Like not, well, again, I'm using private here in the wrong way. It's considered to be Reshut HaYachid. If it's more than a Beit Satayim, we said earlier, we've said this 100 times, though it's confusing each time, that if it has boundaries, or if there's no boundaries, then you can't carry, it's a Carmelite, right? If it has boundaries, so then it depends on what the purpose of the boundaries were. If they were there to protect your livestock for commercial purposes, or to protect you from lawsuits, then it's considered to be a Carmelite, right? If they're there, if it's what we call hukaf l'dira, it's encircled in order to live in that space, right? We had this case with the campgrounds before, many cases like this. Then it's considered to be Reshut HaYachid, and you can carry anywhere inside of that Carmelite, inside of that area, no matter how big it is, which of course is what we do for our Eruv, right? You put an Eruv around the city, as long as it's done l'dira, the dira could be humongous. It could be 20 miles. It's okay, in theory, right? So ask the Gemara, so I don't understand. if you're assuming that according to Shmuel, the walls of the house go up and encircle the roof as well, who cares if the roof is huge? It has walls around it, right? Says the Gemara, well, so what? Here it's more than Beit Satayim. Now, what about the mechitzot that are the imaginary walls? How the imaginary walls are lemata avidan. They were created. The reason you put walls around your house is to live in your house, is not to have imaginary walls around your roof, right? Because they're not real, just to be clear. And lemala lo avidan. They weren't made for above. And so you end up with this really interesting situation where you have walls, but they're not walls that were made to live in. Because the walls, well, they were made to live in, but to live somewhere else. And since they're not made to live on the roof, therefore, technically, have, says the Gemara, karfaf, which just means a big open space, that's yeter mi beit satayim, that's bigger than 5,000 amot, shelo hukaf l'dira. It has walls, they're halachic walls, but they're not walls for living in. And kol karfaf yoter mi beit satayim shelo hukaf l'dira, imitatim ela arba. And so the issue here is really not, I mean, we're confusing you, but Shmuel holds you can carry on a roof because the walls of the house go up and they count as imaginary walls around your roof. But if it's too big, then you can't count those walls anymore. Rav thinks you probably can count the walls, but Shmuel holds you can't count those walls, and it's not, or at least they're not walls that are hukaf l'dira, and therefore you can't carry on that roof, according to Shmuel.
Imaginary walls.
These imaginary walls. Remember, Rav holds the imaginary walls count as mukaf l'dira, and you can carry in the whole roof. But if you have 4 houses together, then the imaginary walls don't help you because you can't find the imaginary walls very easily. They're not nicker. So there's a kula and a chumrah.
Right. Well, so just remember, there are 2 different kinds of imaginary walls, right? So there are imaginary walls when there are no seams between the houses, and that only Shmuel views those as real imaginary walls,
Exactly.
Whereas Rav ignores those imaginary walls because there are no seams between the houses. On the other hand, when there are either seams between the houses, or when you look at the full surrounding of the houses that are together, so then both Rav and Shmuel agree that those walls go up to Shemayim, and so as a result, those imaginary walls everybody agrees upon. But the question is does it create too big a space according to Shmuel?
No, the question is whether those are considered hukaf l'dira, right? So the walls are there, and according to Shmuel, they're not hukaf l'dira. So if it's more than that space, they don't count. According to Rav, they are. It does count. Correct. Itmar. Now says the Gemara, what about a boat? Sfina, right? So you got a boat. Now again, the understanding we think here is that you're talking about the top. Well, yeah, you're talking about top of the boat, which is like a gag, let's say, right? Because you don't sit inside the boat, presumably. So you have a sfina. Rav Amar mutar l'tatel b'kulo. You can carry in the whole boat, mainly because the boat has walls on the outside. Those walls go up and they count as a mechitza. Shmuel says, ein metaltalin bo ela arba, and the same reason, right? Rav Amar mutar l'tatel b'kulo da ika mechitzata. It has walls, and Shmuel says it's true it has walls, but those walls don't count. Shmuel Amar ein metaltalin bo ela arba amot because mechitzot lehavriach mayim asuyot. Again, the walls of a boat are not made to be a house. They're made to prevent water from getting in. And Shmuel says, now, of course, they're also made to be a house, right? So this is where you can see the machloket. But according to Shmuel, the primary goal of having a boat hole, a hole around your boat, is to keep water out. And therefore, it's a wall, it counts, but it's not hukaf l'dira. And therefore, if the boat, now this is how Rashi understands it, if the boat is more than Beit Satayim, right? If the boat is more than 5,000 amot, you can't carry on the boat. If the boat's less than 5,000 amot, it's not a problem because it's like a karfaf that's pachon mi beit satayim, right? So it doesn't have, and it has a mechitza. And the mechitza doesn't have to be the dira. But if it's bigger than that, then you have to worry about this issue. And according to Shmuel, you have to be careful. You don't go on a big boat on Shabbat, right? So now we don't pass like Shmuel, so that might help people go on big boats on Shabbat. Asked Rav Chia bar Yosef l'Shmuel, says Rav Chia bar Yosef Shmuel, I have a cruise set up for next week, and I really am curious to know, hilchatech kavatech, hilchatech kirav. It's a little bit of an insulting question to ask, right? But do we pass like you, I can't go on the boat, or do we pass like Rav? He said, don't worry about it, hilchatech kirav. I don't think you should do it, but we paskin like Rav, basically, well, I don't mind. So you can go on the boat on Shabbos, even though it's bigger than Beit Satayim. Well, you can carry on the boat, not a question of going on the boat. You can carry even though it's bigger than Beit Satayim. Now, Amr of Gido Amar Rav, Chir Bar Yosef, Umode Rav. Now, Rav, who says you're allowed to carry on the entire boat, even if it's bigger than Beit Satayim, Rav would admit, Shim Kafa Alpia, if you turn the boat upside down, right? Then, and you want to walk on the bottom of the boat, which is now the roof of the boat, right? She'ein metaltalin ba ela arba amot. You can only walk 4 amot on top of the boat. What the heck? Kafa lamai. Now, why'd you turn this boat upside down? Maybe, you didn't really have good affordable housing. You had all these boats and no one's going on because of Corona or something. So they figure, let's turn the boats upside down. People will live under the boats, right? If that's the case, then under the boat is regular dira. The walls should go up. It should be like the roof of a house. Why can't you walk on the whole roof, according to Rav? Why is it different than a roof of an individual? Ella must be your kaf'a lezafta. You turn the boat upside down in order to paint it, right? To put zefet, to tar it. So since you're doing it for commercial purposes, now the walls of the boat are not there for a dira. They're not for someone to live inside. They're there because they're there just because they're there, but you're not using them for dira. And therefore, although the walls of the boat might go up to shamayim, they don't count as mukaf l'dira. And if the boat's more than 2,000 amot, 5,000 amot, you can't walk more than arba amot on this boat on Shabbat. Interesting halacha. Rav Ashi mati la asfina. Rav Ashi taught this machloket about a boat, and Rav Acha the Rava this machloket of I'm going to give you my version. This machloket of Rav and Shmuel about a boat, and Rav Acha the Rava taught it about aksadra. Now, aksadra turns out to be a very fascinating and important case that's going to consume us for many days now. But remember, an aksadra is generally I use the word pergola. I don't actually know if that word means that, but those things you put out in your yard where you don't have any walls, right? You just have supports that go up and you have a roof, right? So is there a better word for it?
Like an umbrella or something, or what?
I've been calling it a covered patio, but yeah, I think a pergola is actually the right term.
I must have got the word from somewhere, but I never used it in my real life, right? So, but basically, it's like you see those things out in the garden where you have a platform, you have 4 posts going up, and a covered roof, right? So that's
a gazebo.
Gazebo, that's a great word. Okay, gazebo. But remember, just to be clear, you only have posts. You don't have any. It's not like there's no walls in between, right? So an aksadra, a gazebo, I like that word better. It's easier to say. An aksadra is usually, Rashi says, or very often near your house. If your aksadra is near your house, then you get into very complicated questions, which we're going to get into, about does the house count as a wall for your aksadra, or the roof, right? Does the edge of the roof going down? But we have a case now, the itmar, of aksadra bebik'ah. Let's say you have this patio in the middle of a valley. Again, Rashi points out, we like this case because we're isolating there's no borders around it. It's just smack in the middle of the Sahara, right? In a valley. Okay, you have an aksadra bibika. Says Rav, mutar letaltel bekula. You can carry in this entire aksadra. Ushmul omer, ein metaltel ba. You carry 4 amot, similar to what we argued about the roof, right? Now, why? Rav amar mutar letaltel bekula, because even though there are no walls, there's a roof. And Amrinan, you say pi tikra yorev v'sotem. You say that the edge of the roof goes down and closes up the wall, and you have an imaginary mechitza. And since, again, you have to assume here that we're talking about where it's more than, sorry, you don't have to say that, any size. And the walls go down, and therefore you have pi tikra yorev v'sotem. The walls of it go down, and you're able to carry in the aksadra because it's imaginary walls, right? And Shmuel says you don't say that. Shmuel Omer, where my Shmuel Omer aim metalton ba'arba'a lo aminam pitikra yored v'sotim. We think, I would say now we think that this means that Shmuel does not hold of that at all. Shmuel holds that the walls go up, but Shmuel does not hold that walls go down. And we've seen in Sukkah, which I guess we'll see again and soon, not too long from now, that there is a machloket about how you apply these different principles. But let's presume that Shmuel says you don't say it at all. There might be other issues, but that's the simple
this is assuming that he was living there or something, because he couldn't go from his house to there on Shabbat.
No, he could. Remember, let's say as long as that's outside your tchum, you can go anywhere, right? Let's say let's say there's a ball on this patio, and you want to play ball on the patio. Well, ball might not be a problem because it's less than 3 tefachim. But let's say you want to play football on the patio, right? So according to Rav, you can play football on the patio. You can't bring the football to the patio, maybe. But if it's there, you can carry on that area. That's a simple thing.
You couldn't, right.
Now, says the Gemara, let me just point out something very interesting. Rav Aliba de Rabbi Meir, right? According to Rav, Aliba de Rabbi Meir, remember, Rabbi Meir said that all of the roofs that let's say you have 4 houses, the roofs are Rishut Achat. You don't view them as being connected to the people who live below them. It's one, and again, I'm saying private, even though it's owned by many people, but it's one Rishut you can carry on that roof if you have a mechitza, right? Now, according to Rav, you have a mechitza because the outer walls count as a mechitza. And so you can carry on that roof.
And Shmuel too.
According to Shmuel too, unless it's bigger than 2,000 amot. Oh, sorry,
Right,
it's
so-
a time. Keep doing that. Right, according to Shmuel too. But according to Rav, Aliba de Rabbi Meir, litaltel migag lichatzer. Why can't you carry from a gag, which is basically considered to be private property that's jointly owned, to a chatzer, which is private property that's jointly owned, meaning they're in the same category. Why can't you go from one to the other on Shabbat, assuming you can go from one category to another? And we're going to see later that Rabbi Meir says you can carry from one roof to another roof, but he limits it to roofs. And he limits it, you can't carry from one type of thing, a gag, to another type, which is a chatzer. So why not? Says the Gemara, Mishum de Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi. Well, that's because of what Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi said, which, if you recall, Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi explained that the reason the reason Rabbi Meir prohibits carrying within a roof, if one section of the roof is more than 10 tefachim higher than another, is because it looks like you're carrying from one area to another area, and we're afraid that in a Reshut Rabim, you're going to carry from the Reshut Rabim into a tel, a pillar, that's another area, which is prohibited because it's a Reshut Yachid, and therefore they also prohibited you to carry from one area to another area. So that's why you can't carry from a roof to a chatzer, okay? However, continues the Gemara, Shmuel aliba de Rabbanan. Now, according to Shmuel aliba de Rabbanan, who says that if the gag is more than 2,000, more than satayim, more than 5,000 amot, it's considered to be a carmelit, right? And you can't carry at all on this gag because even though you have walls on the outside that are imaginary, since they're not made l'dira, they don't count. And so remember, if you have walls that are not hukaf l'dira, then, or if you have whatever it's called, if you have a karfaf that's not hukaf l'dira, it's considered a carmelit. Ask the Gemara, well, what about carrying from that onto a, where am I? A karfef, which is a carmelit, right? If this gag is considered to be a carmelit, why can't you carry from this gag into another area that's a carmelit? Now, again, you can't carry more than 4 amot, but why can't you carry 2 amot on one to 2 amot on the other, right? Of course, this only makes sense according to Shmuel. Says Rava bar Ula, because Gzera Shama Yifchat Hagag. We're worried that maybe the gag will become smaller than satayim, than 5,000 amot. Let's say, right, someone decides they want to have more sunlight in their house, right? And they live on the corner of this roof, right? This is a house under the roof. So they knock down part of their house and they open it up. Of course, they knock down the roof. And so then the next Shabbat, the roof no longer is Beit Satayim. If the roof is no longer Beit Satayim and it has imaginary walls that go up around it, it's considered to be Reshut HaYachid. And carrying from Reshut HaYachid to a carmel, it is prohibited, midrabanan. And so because it's not reliable that the roof will remain bigger than a Beit Satayim, I guess it was pretty common in those days, to cut down part of your roof. So therefore they prohibited you, midrabanan, from carrying from this roof, which is a carmelit, to another carmelit, because your roof is, your roof is
you can also just have a wall somewhere in the middle of the roof, and that would also cut down the size of the rooftop. So that might be a little easier case than actually carrying down part of the house.
Why I said my case as we go forward. Okay, so ask the Gemara, I don't get it. Let's say you have 2 karfaf, right? You have 2, again, a karfaf is like a pen, right? So if you have 2 pens next to each other, they're less than 2,000 amot, or and they're mukaf, but they're not mukaf. They're not mukaf ledira, right? Let's say they're used for animals. So according to you, you shouldn't be able to carry from one to the other either. Why? Because maybe you will. Where am I? I'm sorry. Let's say you have two karfefot that are more than satayim, and they're surrounded by walls, right? So, but if it's too big, right? If it's yoter mi beit satayim and it's mukaf but not mukaf ledira, it's considered still to be a karmelit. So, how could you carry from two? Right? You're at the rodeo, or you got two huge pens. Each one's got a border around it. Each one's more than beit satayim. You shouldn't be allowed to carry from one to the other because maybe one of them will become smaller. Shama yifachet Dilma nifchet one of them, and then it will be Reshut HaYachid, right? Because it has a border around it. And you're going to carry. Now, who says you can? But anyways, you don't find that. Because that's different. Because Hatam, when you're talking about your rodeo, and you have a wooden fence around the pen, you can see the fence, right? Hatam imifchet minkra le milta. You're going to see it, right? You have the ability to look and say, oh, the fence is 500 feet away. I think this is bigger than a Beit Satayim. If you look up the next week and you see the fence is 200 feet away, it's not a Beit Satayim. And obviously I couldn't do this, but in those days where it really mattered to know how big it was, they had the ability to determine, they had a good skill in saying how far away it is. So if the rodeo fence was made smaller, you would be able to see it. But hacha, if it's talking about a roof, remember, there are no real barriers, right? If you look off this roof, you see nothing. And so therefore, imifchet lo minkra milta, if it gets smaller, you won't necessarily know, right? All you see is that the roof ends a few hundred feet away. But if that roof ends 200 feet or 300 feet, it's very difficult to tell from where you're standing. And therefore, with the roof, they had to make a gezerah, but with a regular karfaf, which is surrounded by mechitzot, they didn't make a similar gezerah. And that's according to Shmuel.
Now, why should being able to see it matter? If we were talking about before we were talking about imaginary walls, which you can't see. I mean,
you can't see imaginary walls. That's the problem.
No,
So the issue here is that the space that you're in, you have to be able to estimate how big the space that you're in. If it's Beit Satayim, it's permitted. If it gets to be smaller, it becomes prohibited. What we're saying is that if the borders are visible, you can tell how big the space is. If you're on a roof, it's very hard to estimate how big the space is. So even if you measured it before Shabbos and you determined that it was big enough, we made a gezerah that you shouldn't carry because the next week you might mess it up. You might get the wrong one. I think we'll stop here because the next words are complicated. And we're going to read them again tomorrow anyways. So we'll stop here. God willing, we'll pick up tomorrow. It's a complicated daf again. I'll give you that warning. And we're going to start 3 lines from the bottom. We're going to get back to the Mishnah, explaining all the opinions in the Mishnah. We've discussed all these concepts in the last 2 days already, but the Gemara is going to make it very formal tomorrow.
I find it strange that just because something can change from one Shabbat to Shabbat, there's a gezerah that you can't do it. I mean, the walls of your house might blow down, and it might not be like a dirah anymore or something like that. I mean,
right, but that you would recognize, you'd be able to tell that. The point is something changes where you wouldn't be able to tell.
I'm sure there's a lot of things that could change that you can't tell.
And I agree with you. There's a lot of things you can change, but a lot of our Masechet has been making just those gezerot, right? Where the only thing you can't do is certain very limited things, but we worry about many other situations. But I agree. Okay.
I found funny the fact that you somehow felt that this was that the entire Masechet was building up to this. On some level, I feel like the opposite, that this would have been a great way to start, right? Which is like, where can you carry and where can't you carry? And so, again, because this is like so fundamental, we've actually cited this Mishnah a bunch of times, and we haven't even gotten to the end of the Mishnah, which is how we paskin, like Rabbi Shimon, which you can go across all of them. So
I agree. I think the Gemara does that a lot, right? They like to do up to it.
When I introduced the parak, I said this is just another example of how it would be good to know everything in the Masechet before you begin the Masechet. So,
well, God willing, we'll pick it up tomorrow and we'll keep knowing everything in the Masechet. 7:30. Shavua Tov.